Today we're going to be talking about the Hazmat Segregation Table. This chart can be found in 177.848 of the regulations. If you're following along using a Hazmat compliance pocketbook, you're going to find that around page 45-46 in the loading unloading section. This is a chart that helps us determine what we can and can't load together, and also tells us if we can load it together, if there are restrictions and what those restrictions are. When you're dealing with the Hazmat Segregation Table, one thing that's important is you need to know both the Hazmat class, the primary class, and if there are any subsidiary classes. Remember those subsidiaries, it'll look like this. You'll see the in parentheses the subsidiary hazard. Before you can determine if they can or cannot be loaded together, you have to know all the Hazmat classes and the subsidiary classes, because whichever is more restrictive, the subsidiary or the Hazmat class, is what you need to go by when you're dealing with this chart. So for instance, on this one, even though our Hazmat class is class 3, because class 8 is also a subsidiary hazard, we have to use both when determining if we can load it together and make sure we're following all the restrictions that exist for either class 3 or class 8 if it can be loaded together. Using the Hazmat Segregation Table is pretty simple. What you're going to do using the table is you're going to find the first Hazmat type you want to load, and you're going to find that on the left where you see class or division listed. So for instance, if you were looking for flammable liquids, if you go to that class or division section on the left column, all the way down, number 10, you're going to find flammable liquids. Then you're going to figure out what the other Hazmat you're loading with it, and up at the top column, you're going to see 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. Simply find that Hazmat class, see where they intersect, and that's going to tell you whether you can load it or not and what those restrictions are. What you're going to find is either a blank space, an asterisk, the letter X, or the letter O. An explanation for each of the letters can be found in the Compliance Handbook right by the Segregation Table, or right in the regulations right where you find the table, which there's a link attached to this video. If it's blank, you can load them together in the same container on the same skid, no restrictions. If you see the asterisk, what the asterisk is telling you is you need to use the explosives table, and we're going to go into that after this section. If you have the letter X says, I cannot load them together at all. They can't be in the same container. They should not be in the same shipment. If you have the letter O is telling us that we can load them together, but there are some restrictions. They should be loaded separate, enough so that during the course of transportation they're unlikely to interact with each other. So that could be skids that are shrink wrapped apart from each other, just so much as there's no chance of them touching or that an incidental spell could cause them to interact with each other. Okay, let's try and do some examples together. So let's look at first class 3 flammable liquids and class 2.3 gas zone A. Take a moment and find where they intersect. Pause for a moment if you need more time. In the intersect in the table, we find the letter X, which means we cannot load these together on the same trailer. All right, let's look at another one. Let's take oxidizers in class 3. So remember, find oxidizer on the left column, and then find class 3 at the top. Again, we're just looking to see where they intersect. Pause if you need a little more time. You'll find an O in this where they intersect. And the O means we can load them together, but they must be separated on the trailer. We're going to do just one more example. Let's look at corrosive and class 2.1 flammable gas. So again, you're just looking on that left column, find corrosive, and then see where it intersects with 2.1 up at the top. We see where it intersects. Pause if you need a little more time. If you're using the chart correctly, you should find a blank space. And a blank space means no restrictions. Same trailer, same skid. No restrictions, we can definitely load this together. Okay, before we move on to the explosives table, let's just look at one more thing. Let's look at that UN 1717 again. This is one where we have the Hazmat class of class 3, but we see there is a subsidiary hazard, class 8, which is corrosive. So if we were trying to decide if we could load this using the segregation table, we'd have to look at both elements of class 3 and the elements of class 8 corrosive and match it up with whatever we were loading it with. And we'd have to go with whatever is more restrictive. So remember, when you're dealing with a subsidiary hazard, you have to take that into account too when determining if the load can be loaded together and what the restrictions are. And you always go with whichever has the greater restrictions. So if you can't load class 8 with something, then you couldn't load this at all. Now we're not going to get too deep into the explosives materials compatibility chart, but just taking a look at it, you're going to go with the compatibility group type on the left versus the compatibility group type on the top. If it's blank, the same rules apply. You can load it together, can be on the same skid. If you see an X, that means these cannot be transported together in the same column. When you're looking at the numbers, you just look up what each number means. 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 5. And here's a little listing of what those mean, but an example would be 1 means an explosive from compatibility group L shall only be carried on the same transport vehicle with an identical explosive.